Hey Saints, just a quick little study here. The last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been sort of binge studying on Dr. Ken Johnson's. He's got a range of books, but his main topics are um, ancient church documents, Dead Sea Scrolls, and then he does a lot with early church fathers. And um, you can get into that. I think I'd highly recommend it. And the reason being is the very ancient church fathers, there was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were fragments of um, not only Book of Enoch, but stuff coming from, all the church fathers all the way down Adam and Enoch and Noah, and then, Jacob and the 12 kids, and Dr. Ken Johnson put together a book on, I think it was the Testaments of the Patriarchs. I bought that one quite a while ago, but I just bought a couple additional books of his now. They're focused on the early church fathers, and I'd have to say there's tons of gold nuggets in there, just helpful stuff, and the rationale for why he published it is pretty cool. He said when he was young, he was saved at, I think he said 12, but when he was young, he was frustrated with all the slight differences in the denominations, and he wanted to know what was real. And so he said, obviously, you can't ask Jesus, and the apostles wrote what they wrote, and that's what you got. But then he said, there are writings, and there were writings of people that studied under the apostles. And matter of fact, there's an epistle of Barnabas. And then there's, writings like Irenaeus and Hippolytus and, on and on. There was actually quite a bit of it. And so he pulled together a book, he's got one that's sort of the prophecies from the early church fathers, and he's got one that's kind of the doctrines from the early church fathers, and both of them are pretty awesome if you got the time. So I've been, binge studying on that, and then a bunch of his videos that are available on YouTube that he teaches on it. And so I just wanted to follow up with one of the nuggets I've got. I'm actually prepping. I'm going to teach through the book of Revelation again. I did that a few years ago in my church, and kind of backed by popular demand, a bunch of people wanted me to do it again, so I'm going to do it again. But I'm not going to just rehash what I did before. I want to bless people and dig in and learn more. And so this is one of the blessings, and it has to do with the Antichrist. And let me bring up, well, first, let me just point out something about the Antichrist, then I'll bring up the notes here. Revelation 9:11, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. So the angel of the bottomless pit, his Hebrew tongue, his name is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue, his name is Apollyon. And, here he's coming out of the bottomless pit, and then I think it's in Revelation 17. 8. The beast that thou sawest was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Okay, so that's the beast. So is that the spirit of the Antichrist? But then he goes into perdition, which is hell. And what happens? We find out that God latches onto the Antichrist and throws him into the pit, perdition, in Revelation 20. So I'm pretty sure this is pointing to, the Antichrist spirit is Apollo or Abaddon in Hebrew, and he's the beast that comes up out of the bottomless pit. And the reason why that, kind of became interesting is I was studying the early church fathers, and Irenaeus, in his book Against Heresy, 5-volume set, the 5th volume, the 30th chapter, the name of the Antichrist equals 666, if spelled out in Greek. And so the little context, Irenaeus studied under Polycarp. And if you know your church history, Polycarp co-ministered with the Apostle John in Ephesus for about 20 years. And so, John receives the book of Revelation, saw it, right? We learned that in chapter 1 of Revelation. He saw these things. And then, there was an angel that explained some of it to him and all this. So I'm betting Polycarp had the interpretation of the book of Revelation down pretty cold, because he had 20 years to sit and ask John every little nuance of it, right? And so his disciple Irenaeus, again, I would say probably had a great handle on the right interpretation of the book. And that's why I think Irenaeus in particular for the book of Revelation is very interesting, because he has such a direct tie to the Apostle John. And so here we got, the name of the Antichrist equals 666 is spelled out in Greek. Well, we know that 666 is mentioned in Revelation 13, but it's confirmed here, spelled out in Greek. Do not even try to find out the number of the name until the 10 kings arise. And so, stop with the idle speculation about who specifically it is, because the 10 nations need to arise first. And I'll argue that the rapture very likely precedes the 10 kings rising. We can get into that later, but the ancient church fathers identified 3 of the 10 nations, and I think it was Sudan, Egypt, and forget another North African country, I believe. And so you sort of get a sense that the 10 nations are probably going to be Middle Eastern or European Middle Eastern. And so that, the Antichrist shall come from the tribe of Dan. Now there's like 3 or 4 church fathers that say from the tribe of Dan, but they don't actually, when Dr. Ken Johnson looked into this, one of them described it as the region or area of the tribe of Dan, the Golan Heights or Bashan from the Bible. And I thought, wow, now that is interesting. That is why the tribe of Dan is not mentioned in the Apocalypse. And if you guys know, the Golan Heights and the tribe of Dan, originally Dan was allocated land down there in Philistine territory, but through Joshua's conquering of the land, the Danites didn't want to take their portion of land. They got afraid of the Philistines, and we know Goliath and those types of critters were down there. So they went and moved north, and they're in the Golan area. The things I'm putting together, though, is now we're seeing that the Antichrist is coming from that region, the tribe of Dan. And that is why Dan is not mentioned in the Apocalypse, and that's the book of Revelation. And what he's pointing to there is in Revelation chapter 7, the sealing of 144,000, the tribe of Dan is missing, and instead, which has happened in another place in the Bible, Dan is dropped and the half-tribe of Manasseh is added. Joseph's kid, 2 kids, Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh is added because, Dan's name was, quote, blotted out, one of the Old Testament promises. And so Dan's not mentioned in the book of Revelation because of the sin. Their 4th kingdom seen by Daniel is Rome, and I think most people knew that. And when he talks about the 4th kingdom, that's Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 2. So we got that confirmation. I thought this was really the interesting part here. Titan is one Greek word that totals 666. Each letter in the Greek represents a number, so every Greek word totals a number. Now that seemed just a little out of context, because he's talking about the tribe of Dan, he's talking about the Antichrist, and the 10 kings here, and he specifically says, don't even try and figure out who the Antichrist is, because even though his name totals 666, and then he goes and he says, and Titan is one Greek word that totals 666. And I think, here's my little overlay. If you put together what you see in the book of Revelation that I just read to you, Revelation 9:11, where it says the king of the bottomless pit comes up, and then we see the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. Well, in chapter 9, he's called Apollyon and Abaddon. He comes up out of the bottomless pit and goes into perdition. So, is that the Antichrist? I think so. And those that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life, when they behold the beast that was, is not, and yet is. And so something about when this beast arises, they're going to go, oh, wow. I think they're going to put two and two together, that somehow he's something special, right? It basically tells us that right there. And I think somehow if that beast that rises is identified as a Titan or as Apollyon or Apollo, as the book told us, you go, wow, that starts to shed a little bit of light. And the fact then that he comes out of the region of Dan, boom. And then after I put those two together, I thought, this thing is really intense, because look, the tribe of Dan includes now this is me typing here, that was Irenaeus, this is me. The tribe of Dan includes the area of Mount Hermon, where the angels who kept not their first estate descended. And what else is on Mount Hermon? You guys probably know this, but that deep cave, if you ever go there, there's a deep cave at the foothills of Mount Hermon, or Hermon, however you want to say it, where they worship Pan. And Pan is another one of those, God terms for Satan. And so you got this rising Apollyon or Apollo coming up out of the region of Dan. Mount Hermon is where the angels that kept not their first estate, they sinned, creating the Nephilim, Titans, right? The Titans, the story starts on Mount Hermon in the region of Dan, and now you've got Apollyon coming up out of the bottomless pit in the region of Dan. Now, how perfect would that be if somehow this is tied to Mount Hermon? It would kind of make sense, wouldn't it? And so that was my nugget. And then as I was seeing, does anybody else say this, that J.R. Church, one of the founders of the old Prophecy in the News, where Gary Stearman used to be, he wrote this in 1666. Interesting. Louis was at the 14th of France, authorized building an observatory in Paris to measure longitude. This was the beginning of the Paris Zero Meridian. Believe it or not, according to the Paris Zero Meridian, Mount Hermon and the ancient territory of Dan is located at 33 degrees east of the Paris Zero Meridian and 33 degrees north of the equator latitude. So there it is, Mount Hermon, 33 degrees north, 33 degrees east. The 33rd degree became an important part of Freemasonry, probably due to history that dates back to the Knights Templar and the French Merovingian dynasty and their family ties to the Danites. See our chapter on Dan and the Guardians of the Grail. So isn't that interesting that the Knights Templar, I didn't know that history takes you back to the tribe of Dan as well. Can you believe that the most significant Illuminati Freemasonry number there is 33, a 33 degree Freemason? What are the chances of that? Very slim. You see, as I mentioned, this has all been strategically planned out since the beginning. The reason why these things are unfolding as they are is because we are in the days spoken of by Jesus Christ himself. And then he quotes Matthew, or as in the days of Noah, they're eating and drinking and giving in marriage, and then the flood comes. So there's the nugget, saints. I hope that's kind of a blessing. We've had lots of speculation the last, I guess 10, 11 years now of Barack Obama being the Antichrist, or Trump, or whoever else. I know people pick one of the Princess Diana's kids over there in England. I know people speculate that the Trudeau from Canada potentially fit, but I think you've got quite a bit here pointing to, including the early church fathers saying he comes out of the region of Dan in the Golan Heights area, and then you've got Mount Hermon in the region of Dan, where you've got the bottomless pit hole of Pan that used to be worshipped there, and you've got the angels that descended on Mount Hermon that started the whole Nephilim problem. Boy, I think there's where people should be looking. Of course, we'll be gone when this happens, but that would be the region to be looking for the Antichrist to ascend. And I think it's very curious that Irenaeus, who probably had the most direct tie to the Apostle John in the book of Revelation, slips in the little thing about Titan is one Greek word that totals 666, because the Titans were descended from the fallen angels, right, at Mount Hermon. So I think this whole thing is pretty darn cool, and I just thought I'd pass it on. God bless, saints. Have a good new year, and keep looking up, because you see these things coming to pass. It's just crazy. God bless.